And in essence, what we did is when we acquired that drug, we picked up something that was de-risked. That's how we looked at it. It was de-risked from several points of view. It was de-risked because it had been on the market already. It was de-risked because there was a lot of experience with it from the manufacturing side. The Citius Pharmaceuticals was the company working on this all the way through and is still working on this approval for us. So, and not only that, but all the clinical trial research, all that was out of the way. It was done. So we're not paying for that at this point, even though we did pay that upfront fee.
Welcome to Seeking Alpha's CEO interviews, informed conversations with the best and brightest CEOs in the publicly traded markets. Quality of leadership is a decisive factor in stock performance. Our show provides intimate and in-depth investing discussions with industry leaders across all sectors of the marketplace. We publish excerpts on social media platforms and the full conversations on seekingalpha.com or on our highly rated Seeking Alpha mobile app under CEO interviews.
Welcome to Seeking Alpha. I'm your host, Jesse Redmond. Today, I'm joined by Leonard Mazur, Executive Chairman of Citius Pharmaceuticals. Leonard, thanks for joining us.
It's a pleasure, and thank you for giving me the time. I really appreciate it.
So I found it really interesting learning about your background. You have a really deep and impressive experience in this space. Can you share a brief overview of your career highlights and what led you to Citius?
Certainly. So I started my career with a company called Cooper Laboratories, which was one of the best things that ever happened to me. I spent 10 years there, and that company was just a great place to be. They made 150 acquisitions, which is a remarkable number when you think about that. You can imagine what that environment must be like. So it was a great environment for a young person coming out of school and joining a company like that, because there were plenty of growth opportunities, and they gave you as much responsibility as you wanted with no guidance.
For better or worse, right?
Which is something that I really enjoyed. So, I rose through the ranks there and started out on the sales side, marketing. Then I went into marketing, then strategic planning, acquisition, then managing one of the company's business units. So that was my foundation in reality. And just have to mention this in passing. That company had a phenomenal CEO and founder by the name of Parker G. Montgomery. I think he's 92 years old today, this year, and he's still going at it. So he's my idol and my hero. So I have to add that in there. So very quickly, I went from there to a much larger company in terms of size, which was BASF, into their pharma division, which was a smaller group. And I launched, I was a director of sales of marketing there. And I launched a drug called Vicodin that you've probably heard of, as well as a cardiovascular drug. Spent 4 years there. Then I went out to the West Coast as vice president of sales and marketing for a company called ICN Pharmaceuticals, which ultimately morphed into Valiant and today Bosch Health. There I launched Ribavirin. It was a breakthrough antiviral drug at that time for the treatment of a rare respiratory virus that afflicts infants. As I always like to say, my wife did not like paradise, Orange County, California. I had to come back to beautiful New Jersey. So I did. And I had a brief stint with a biotech company, but basically at that point, I got involved as executive vice president of a startup company that was in dermatology, had a derm platform, had no revenue, and we raised all of $8 million net from D.H. Blair, as I call him, the underwriter to the stars, to build a company from zero. And it was invaluable for me because it taught me what it means to how to survive and how to build a business with very limited resources. So that company went on to become one of the major platform companies in dermatological prescription drugs, and ultimately sold out to Valiant, coincidentally, for about $2.6 billion, as I recall. So from that point on, I went entrepreneurial, formed several companies, had successful exits, and then basically got together with Myron Holubiak, who's our CEO. And we both come from very similar backgrounds. We both we're both immigrants, by the way. We both immigrated here with our parents. And Myron wound up in Pittsburgh. I wound up in Philadelphia ultimately. And he joined the pharma industry about the same time that I did. And we met at a market research conference of all things, because we were new analysts being trained in how to interpret pharmaceutical market research data. And that's when I met him, and we became friends and remain in touch with each other over all the years. So after a real successful exit, I decided that I wanted to see if we couldn't, Myron and I couldn't start up a company together. We had some firm concepts about what we were looking for. At that point, we wanted something that would address an unmet medical need, and if at all possible, if we could come into a market segment where the competition there was no competition, it was limited, or there wasn't any, in order to give us a complete runway into that market. So what we found, we in-licensed a drug from MD Anderson, which is, that's one of the world's largest cancer hospitals, one of the best cancer hospitals actually in the world, if not the best. And the chief of infectious disease there, Dr. Isam Rad, had invented a solution for sterilizing catheters. And what we did, and I have to say this, in terms of starting up a company, we were a little bit different from most companies. And I'll tell you the reason for it. And that is that, most companies, when they start up, an executive team gets together, a small executive team usually has a concept, puts together a business plan, goes out on the street and raises money. Basically, management gets founders equity along with stock options. It's the usual scenario. In our case, what we did is we funded our company ourselves. So this drug is called MINO-LOK today, as we call it. This drug, we funded it completely ourselves. We funded a phase 2B trial ourselves, which again, it's not the usual route that people take. And people wonder, why would you do something like that? So there are a lot of reasons for that. I think one of the primary ones is that I learned in my entrepreneurial journey, actually, that you had much more respect and much more credibility with your investors if you had skin in the game. And skin in the game meant skin in the game. So, I learned earlier on that when I had to put my house up, and every piece of real estate and every asset that I had real skin in the game at that point. So, and I did that several times during my entrepreneurial journey. So, and I learned from that basically the more you could put in, the more you had a better overview. You had your commitment was beyond belief, and also at the same time, you knew you were never going to fail. So, the first rule is, when you're an entrepreneur, is that failure is not an option. It cannot happen. It will not happen. So as a result, that's how, that was kind of the backdrop to what Myron and I did when we started up. Actually, we started, the name of the company then was called, we named it after ourselves, Leonard Marone Biosciences, or LMBRX. So that was the beginning of our company.
Yeah, that's fantastic. I love seeing that alignment of interest. I think that the best idea is, if you don't have a proper alignment of interest, often fail. And I think too often we see people taking big chances with other people's money. So I respect that approach you're taking. And
Cool.
Leonard, you also have a deep team. You have a deep background, but I was reading you've added 4 executives recently with over 75 years of combined experience in your industry. Can you talk a little bit about the catalyst for building that deeper bench?
Sure. So first of all, let me just highlight something for you, that both Myron and myself have 100 years of combined experience. Okay. So yes. So what happened here is last February, February 21, we raised over $100 million, and in 2 raises primarily, and it was very successful. But it also it gave us a real sense of responsibility in terms of deploying shareholder funds into something that would provide a return and as safe of a return as you could get. So what happened was that we were provided with an opportunity with a cancer drug. We call it ONTAK. That cancer drug had been on the market previously with Citius Pharmaceuticals. Initially, it had been developed by Ligand Pharmaceuticals, and then Eisai took it over. And what happened was during the course of the development of that drug, it was on the market, and Eisai had agreed to reformulate the drug as part of, I guess it was part of an approval. And in reformulating the drug, they made a decision to take the drug off the market at that time. And when they reformulated it, they went back to the FDA and were told that they had to run 2 clinical trials, a lead-in trial and a phase 3 70-patient trial for T-cell lymphoma, which is a very rare cancer, extremely rare. So they did, and during this process, they also out-licensed the drug while they continued to do all the work on it to Dr. Reddy's Laboratories of India. And Dr. Reddy's was on a significant expansion program in that time frame where they went into branded drugs, they went into revenue-producing drugs. They had a major presence in dermatology. This drug was sort of related to dermatology in a sense it was a topical disease, but being treated more by oncologists than dermatologists. So, and then all of a sudden, Dr. Reddy's decided that they were exiting the business, the branded business. They wanted to go back to basics, to the generic business, and they were divesting everything. We found out about it, that divestiture process, and it was an auction. We bid ultimately $40 million, which was a fair amount of money to put down. But the reason we did is because when we were engaged in that process with Dr. Reddy's and Eisai, we found out that number one, they were already in their very last patient. They'd already enrolled their last patient at that time, and that last patient, the trial was scheduled to be completed with that last patient in December of 21. So we thought the risk here is greatly minimized, and we had lead-in data also to look at. But most importantly, it has to do with the question that you asked me about our staff being enlarged. So one of the first expansions that took place from a staff side was prior to us getting into this discussion with Dr. Reddy's and that whole process. We hired probably about 9 months before that, we hired a chief medical officer. And that chief medical officer was Dr. Myron Churchman, who had spent 23 years as the chief of lymphoma and myeloma at Roswell Park in Buffalo, which is a leading cancer treatment center. He had published 180 papers and also had spent 5 years at Celgene as the vice president of lymphoma research worldwide. So great credentials for us. Now, it turned out totally by coincidence that Dr. Churchman had worked with Ligand on that drug. He was a scientific advisor and a consultant to the company. He knew everything about it. Probably knew more about it than Dr. Reddy's did, I would say, just about. So as a result, when we were engaged in this process, the fact that we had Dr. Churchman on our staff really helped us in that whole negotiation and in being selected, because they really looked upon us as having a deep bench, great expertise, and it was a tremendous advantage for us during those negotiations. So that was step one in terms of that. So we complete the transaction. Now we realized that we did have to add some critical staff members. We needed to have CMC. So that's the manufacturing side of the approval process. When you file all your documents for a new drug application or a biological license application, basically the manufacturing component is the one component that you'll see sinks most smaller biotech companies, which is most of the time it's the cause of a complete response letter. It's always has something to do with the manufacturing. And so what we did is we hired Kelly Creighton. He was with a consulting firm that we were using, and we knew his background, we knew his work. He had worked on hundreds of applications for approval and knew everything about manufacturing from A to Z. So bringing him on board was a definite advantage for us. We backed that up with bringing on board a regulatory person as well from the same consulting group, Catherine Kessler. She's outstanding also, lots of experience in terms of regulatory filings with the agency. So, again, the FDA is the most critical part of the existence of a small biotech company, biotech pharma company like ours, like any of them, because they're the ones that determine your fate ultimately. And if you don't have things lined up correctly for them, your fate is going to be questionable, or it's going to be dragged out in terms of getting an approval, if you ever get that approval when you run across that process. So we brought on board somebody who was really solid in terms of background and really a great addition to the team. So we needed to have individuals like this come on board with us. So we, in essence, what we did, we doubled our staff. So we went from about 7 to 14. All right, which is probably for most people, they look at it and think, "Holy smokes, that's nothing." But we are very careful with managing overhead. We want to make sure that we've got very heavily experienced people in the company. We're not a training ground for anybody. We don't bring in interns or people of that at that level. So as a result, we've got a good bench right now, great team in place. We know that we're going to get there as a result of what we've done here. And in essence, what we did is when we acquired that drug, we picked up something that was de-risked. That's how we looked at it. It was de-risked from several points of view. It was de-risked because it had been on the market already. It was de-risked because there was a lot of experience with it from the manufacturing side. The Citius Pharmaceuticals was the company working on this all the way through and is still working on this approval for us. So, and not only that, but all the clinical trial research, all that was out of the way. It was done. So we're not paying for that at this point, even though we did pay that upfront fee. So we think we have a great situation here with ONTAK at this point.
Yeah, that's really interesting. It seems like you have a bunch of milestones that are important coming up, and you've kind of put the team in place to manage and execute on those potential opportunities, which is a nice combination to see.
Correct.
Do you want to talk a little bit about MINO-LOK? That seems like an interesting one. The first and only antibiotic lock to sterilize and salvage central venous catheters. It's a huge market. Huge market, something I didn't know much about before researching your company. Not a great current standard of care in the market for something like this. Can you talk a little bit about the drug and what the opportunity set is there?
Right, you've done your homework. My compliments to you.
Thank you.
So, yes, so MINO-LOK, that's the drug that I mentioned earlier. That's really at the cornerstone of the company also. And it's a combination of, it's a solution, and it's a combination of 3 ingredients: minocycline, which is an antibiotic, sodium EDTA, which is a chelating agent, and ethyl alcohol, which is alcohol basically. And so those 3 come together in a very synergistic fashion. And what happens here is they're used in the treatment of catheter-related bloodstream infections or central line associated bloodstream infections. There's 2 different terms that get used interchangeably with slightly different meanings associated with them. So, and here's what happens. Most of this infection occurs with patients that have long-term central venous catheters implanted. most of those patients are cancer patients. And when the catheter gets implanted, it's implanted surgically. Most people don't realize this, but it's usually initially placed subclavically by the collarbone, and then it gets threaded to the heart. So to deliver important medications, chemo, nutrients, and so forth. It's a lifeline for cancer patients. What happens over time, and it's a big number of these that get inserted annually in the United States. It's in the 7 million patient range, roughly. Out of that, probably somewhere 400 to 500,000 thereabouts of those patients will get infected. So what happens when that catheter gets infected? The first sign of it is a fever. And if the patient's an outpatient, they get hospitalized immediately into the intensive care unit. And the only standard of care today, for the most part, is remove the catheter and replace it. So when they go to remove and replace it, it requires 2 separate surgical procedures. One is to remove it, and then the second part of it is to replace it. A lot of times what happens is that catheter is now placed situated down in the groin area, and it gets threaded back up to the heart. And that's when you get about an 18 to 20% adverse event occurrence. And that occurrence can be serious, it can be deadly even. And you have to think about this. These patients are severely immunocompromised. They're not in the strongest of conditions, and it's a painful procedure to go through. Nobody really likes going through this procedure. So here's what Dr. Rad did. Dr. Rad worked on this for a fair number of years in order to come up with the ideal mixture. And the ideal profile had to be that you had to be able to put something into that catheter and for an amount of time that would not severely hamper or hold back the use of IVs at all. So what he did is he finally worked on this to the point where he got it so that you could put MINO-LOK in. The nurse comes in, injects the catheter with the MINO-LOK solution, locks it. And this is an important point for everybody here to know, and that is this solution does not go into man. It does not go into the body. It resides within the catheter and a line. So they know exactly how much solution to put in. They're very experienced. They're very experienced in locking it, so it will not drip into that superior vena cava. So basically, it'll sit there for 2 hours. At the end of 2 hours, the nurse comes back in, aspirates out all the contents, and then flushes the line, and the patient has 22 hours of uninterrupted IV flow, which is very critical. You do this 5 to 7 days in a row, and that line and that catheter are completely sterilized, including any biofilm that may have formed on the inner walls of the catheter and the line. What occurs when these catheters get contaminated like that is biofilm, which is bacterial slime, will form on the inner walls. And the reason for that is because the bacteria have a real affinity for plastic. So, and this solution is the only solution that can really wipe that out, clean it, and it will not be there after 5 to 7 days. And so basically, the advantage of all this is there's several. One, the patient doesn't have to go through 2 separate surgical procedures. It's very, it's patient friendly. It's nurse friendly in terms of administration. There's no need to have anesthesiologists, radiologists, et cetera, on board for surgical procedures. Also, at the same time, it'll be cost savings to the hospital, because those 2 separate surgical procedures with everything else that goes around with it, it's about a cost of about $10,000 total cost. We're estimating right now that our cost for this is going to be somewhere around between $2,000 to $3,000. We're still modeling that out. So we plan to be cost savings to the overall system. So this, I think, will have significant advantages. And not only that, but we think once it's approved, it'll be written into the guidelines that are published for the treatment of catheter-related bloodstream infections as an approach to use in the event of that infection. I should also highlight that at the same time, what's going on with that patient is also being administered systemic antibiotics for any infection that may be raging inside their bodies, which they'll take a culture on and they'll determine the appropriate antibiotic for that. So the FDA recognizes this as a breakthrough. So as a result, they gave us a special status for this called QIDP, which stands for Qualified Infectious Disease Product, which means that every drug, as you probably know, when they file for a new drug approval, it takes 12 months to approve that application. With QIDP, that time gets cut in half to 6 months. Not only that, but what you also receive with this is you get extra regulatory protection. So every drug, regardless of patent status, under the Hatch-Waxman Act, new drug, gets 3 to 5 years of market exclusivity, regardless of patent. So with QIDP, you get 5 years on top of that. So we believe we'll have with the QIDP status, we'll get to somewhere between 9 to 10 years of market exclusivity, meaning nobody can come in, nobody can do what's known as a paragraph 4 filing against you. Any of that, none of that is would occur to you. You've got the backup of the federal government saying nobody can come in here. This is exclusive, and we'll be the one and only ones in that category by ourselves. So what we like about these two drugs is there is a synergy here between ONTAK and MINO-LOK. And the synergy is that both are within the oncology sphere. So basically, with ONTAK, we're going to be calling on a smaller number of oncologists because it's a very small universe, but we'll start out with that. And then once MINO-LOK gets approved, we'll then add to the group with, because they're going to be calling on infectious disease specialists as well. So we'll add somewhat to that effort, but still it's going to be doesn't require a lot of manpower to penetrate into these markets. So, and with ONTAK, we'll have 12 years of market exclusivity under the BLA that we file.
Fantastic. That's exciting. And I like to see the synergies between the two products. That's neat too. The next opportunity is in a different space, which is Halo-Lido. That's RX therapy for hemorrhoids. This again is a massive market, over $2 billion opportunity, and a chance to be the first and only approved prescription therapy for hemorrhoids. Can you talk a little bit about how this drug works and how quickly we might see approval here?
Certainly. So this is a little bit different for us. All right. This is, we go from talking about cutaneous T-cell lymphomas to catheter-related bloodstream infections, and all of a sudden you got to switch gears and you're talking about hemorrhoids. So the reason why we have this is it's not of marketing interest to us at this point. And the reason what happened here is when we started the company, we ultimately, the private company, LMBRX, we merged in with Citius, which was public, in order to get that public listing and take advantage of the public markets here. So with that, we saw Halo-Lido sitting here. Actually, at that time, it was called Hydro-Lido. It had hydrocortisone combined with lidocaine. They were doing a small clinical trial on it at the time. And while the data wasn't convincing enough to move into phase 3, it was a phase 2B trial. It gave us some real insight into the way we thought it should be formulated. So we've reformulated it to incorporate halobetazole, which is a fluorinated or high potency topical steroid, prescription strength. And what we liked about this market opportunity is this: there are no prescription FDA approved drugs for the treatment of hemorrhoids after all these years on the market. So you have the over-the-counter market, which has Preparation H and other products like that, but those are combinations of other much lesser strength compounds. So with what we have here is it's a market that has still has DESI drugs that are known. Those are older drugs that were around prior to 1962, before the Food and Drug Administration was created, and they were allowed to remain on the market as a result. Those are the combination of a hydrocortisone and lidocaine, lower strength, still prescribed. They're prescribed by physicians, but we knew if you could get truly a prescription strength hemorrhoid drug on the market, that would be significant. It's not for us, but it is for another player, for somebody that can handle a large sales force and a direct-to-consumer advertising campaign in order to promote it. What I can tell you about the interest there is when we had the first form on the market, when we published the data from it, we were contacted by two major pharmaceutical companies who said to us, look, when you get data, we like this category. When you get positive efficacy data in a phase 2B trial, just contact us immediately. So we think that we can monetize this asset for the shareholders. So we'll either out-license on real favorable terms, or we'll sell off the drug completely. But the purpose of it is to show efficacy and then move to the next level and monetize everything for our shareholders. And we think we can do that successfully. We have an IND approved now for this from the FDA to move into a phase 2B trial with enrollment scheduled to begin shortly. So we should have all the data on that before 22 is over. We believe we'll have that trial completed. We'll be able to look at it, and we'll be able to determine what the appropriate next steps are. So, but you're right, it's a significant opportunity. Big market with a huge unmet need.
And we talked earlier a bit, or I think you mentioned that you raised some cash last year. I think it was maybe in February of last year you mentioned.
Right.
Can you talk a little bit about the reason for that capital raise and where you stand today with that position?
Well, that capital raise obviously worked out for us. We knew that we were going to have to do some capital raise at somewhere along the way, additional capital into the company. And so when this opportunity happened, I don't think we ever expected that it would be that large. So, and I'll give you an example that was done in two tranches. The second tranche, which was for $76.5 million, it was oversubscribed by two. And we could have raised more, but we didn't have enough shares outstanding at that point. And so probably that was fortuitous. But what was interesting, it was completed in 4 hours among 44 funds. That's all it took in the middle of this pandemic, which is hard to believe. So right now, where we are as of our last reporting period, which was in September 30th for our year end, we have about $65 million cash left, roughly. So, and we think we have enough cash to take us all the way through for the better part of 23. So we think we're in a good cash position. Our objective is we really don't want to dilute our shareholders anymore. So, and everybody has to recognize that I have $22 million invested in the company, 22.5 million invested in the company. Myron has 4 million, and neither one. Our objectives are completely, and what we see for the shareholders, we're completely aligned with them, totally. So we are going to hold everything down that we can in terms of dilution as much as possible. We're going to be looking at non-dilutive ways. If we have to do anything, it'll be in non-dilutive ways. We do have international opportunities with our portfolio, which we never planned to go into those international markets by ourselves. So as these opportunities, especially our late phase 3 compounds, come into closer and closer to approval, we're going to be setting up international rights. Those will come with upfront fees and so forth, like everyone else does when you go to the international markets.
And with the strong cash position, you talked about the deep bench that you built out. We talked about the strong pipeline that you have. That's a real rosy scenario, but there's always risk to a business, always things that the CEO or executive chairman in your case might worry about. What do you see as the biggest risk to the business?
So I think, there's always the factors, the factors that you can't control, so you can't control, a disaster to the economy or anything like that. And I think for us, we're very positive about our outcome. I think that we've got compounds that are very approvable from what we can see, and so as a result, I think our FDA risks are greatly minimized at this point. So, and I think that execution-wise, we've got a great team in place to be able to execute correctly, and I think that's always the big risk for most smaller biopharma companies like at our level. But I think we've got a great staff, great experience, deep bench. I think I don't think we'll have any issues from that side. So for what I see from my perspective, it's a clear road ahead for us at this point.
And my final question for you is, you have a lot of exciting things on the horizon, but particular to this year, 22, what is the thing that you're most excited about?
I think the most exciting thing that's going to happen here, and there are two of them actually. One will be the filing of our biological license application somewhere in the second half of this year. And the second one is the completion of our clinical trial for MINO-LOK. So we think we're going to have that trial completed by the end of this year. We got COVIDized along the way. We should have been already done by now, but for 2 years, we were pretty much stopped in our tracks as far as getting our clinical trial executed in hospitals, because that's the only place you could do your clinical trial. And there were no hospitals available, or very few.
Well, this has been fantastic. I wish you the best of luck moving forward, and thank you for joining us on Seeking Alpha.
Thank you for giving me the time, and I appreciate it. Thank you very much.